Welcome to Narratives and Nightcaps, Books, Beverages, and Author Conversations. Today I am joined by Jane Tara. She's published children's books, several plays, and a few YA romance novels, and her newest book, Tilda is Visible, officially released on February 25th. Hello, Jane.
Hi, Brie. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you for being here. I have been looking forward to this conversation ever since Tilda is Visible arrived at my doorstep and I officially got to read it. I've just been so excited and I appreciate your time and I can't wait for listeners to hear all about this amazing book that is out in the world.
Thank you.
But before we do that, do you have any sort of quote, air quote, nightcap pairing that you would recommend to readers for either to drink while they're reading or is just a favorite of yours?
Well, interestingly, throughout the novel, Tilda and her friends drink whiskey, and she gets a little tanked on whiskey a couple of times. I'm not a big whiskey drinker. Well, I'm not a whiskey drinker at all, although my son has made me a few great whiskey sours. So it is a good drink to pair with Tilda. But for me, I cannot start the day without a really, really good, strong flat white coffee. And Sydney ciders can be, well, we take our coffee very seriously down here. So, yeah, a really great flat white coffee.
I love that. I love the options. And yes, Tilda does indulge with her friends too a bit. So let's do a quick overview of who Tilda is, what Tilda is Visible is all about, and what readers can expect from the story.
So, Tilda is Visible is about a woman in her early 50s who wakes up one day and her little finger is missing. And she goes to the doctor. She's not crazy, like her finger has actually disappeared, and her doctor diagnoses her with invisibility, and it's a condition that is quite common with women in their 50s. She's told that there's no cure, that she'll probably end up disappearing, and that's just the way it is. She is given the details for a support group, but other than that, she just needs to get on with her life with this condition. But Tilda doesn't want to disappear, and she ends up going on a journey of healing, I guess, where she needs to face the past, certainly to face her childhood, and to learn how to see herself again.
Well said. Oh my goodness. It gives me chills and I've read it. So, you say on your website that this is the book that you always wanted to write, but first you needed to live it. Was there anything in particular that inspired this story or inspired Tilda as a character?
Yes, so I'm nearly 56. I'm 56 next week, but when I was 45, I was right in the thick of it, and in the thick of where invisibility sort of started for me. And I was misdiagnosed with a degenerative eye condition called retinitis pigmentosa, which the love interest Patrick in the book
Yes.
has. And as fate would have it, I was referred to a place called the Centre for Eye Health at a university here in Australia for further testing, and told that they would be able to tell me how much sight I'd lost and how much and how long I had left of my sight. But as fate would have it, there was a machine that they needed for my appointment that was broken and they needed to get a part from overseas. So I actually couldn't get in for this appointment for 3 months. And during that time, I at first completely freaked out, a little bit like Tilda does when she's first diagnosed. But then I went down this rabbit hole of questioning what it means to see and how you see, and it took me on a grand adventure, actually, that by the time I went for the tests, I was prepared to have the worst news and deal with it, but also I don't know, deal with it in sort of an unusual way. turned out I'd been misdiagnosed. So that was amazing. But I'd been left with all of these questions and answers and information from this period. And it sort of inspired me to write about it. So that's where Tilda originally came from.
Wow. So, how long were you working on this book?
Oh, I was, well, it took me 10 years. No, sorry, 7 years to sit down and write. And during that time, going back to your previous question, during that time, I really lived more of what Tilda goes through. I sat down to write Tilda during the second very long lockdown in Sydney during the pandemic. And a lot of authors did that. I know they spent their time writing their pandemic novel, and I certainly did that as well. But from the time that I'd been misdiagnosed to the time that I sat down to write, I went through a divorce like Tilda did. I went through a learning to see myself again after feeling incredibly invisible. I went through this journey that I'd had an experience where I started to question what it means to see and how we perceive the world and ourselves, to a point where I think I was old enough to write Tilda. I think I needed to go through some life experiences before I wrote her. So it was a long time coming, and I'd written little bits throughout the years. And when I sat down to write her, I guess 6 months. It was fairly quick process then.
Okay. Yeah, no, that's so interesting. What would you say was when you finally sat down for that 6-month period, were there any scenes in particular that were challenging?
Mm, everything. Yeah.
The whole thing.
Yeah. No, so I had a rough draft. Like, I wrote a rough draft really quickly. And when I read that, I just, because I've been writing for long enough, I have this kind of, it's almost in my diaphragm. It's like an intuitive sense of if something is working or not. And I was reading it and I felt very separate from the story and thinking something's missing. Like, something's missing. Why will people care about this? And there's a best-selling Australian author called Michael Robotham who, I've heard him say that he has a sign on his wall, on his study, that says "Make them care." And at every point, it's like, why will the reader care? Why will the reader care? And I realized that in this first draft, I'd very much kept Tilda at arm's length. I'd kept her at a distance. And I thought, well, how can I make the reader care about this? And I realized I needed to step into Tilda a lot more, which was very difficult. And that's where Tilda's the issues around her marriage, around her traumatic childhood. These are sort of based on experiences that I had myself. So I wrote them in, and that was challenging. But then I also really discovered a way to sort of describe Tilda's inner dialogue. And I created this almost character Pearl, who is Tilda's inner voice. And of course, Pearl is an acronym for Program Everything, Always Repeat Loop. And that is exactly what our inner program is. It's just a program and we can change it. But I used a lot of my own inner programs for Tilda's. And when I finished it and read it, I thought, okay, well, this feels like it's working for me. But now I feel so vulnerable. I can't show anyone. Like, and I know a lot of people in the book industry here in Australia. I thought I just can't. So I put it away for nearly a year. And during that time, some people knew that I'd been working on a novel and were asking, "Oh, have you finished it?" And I'm like, "Yeah, but I feel a bit awkward showing people." Showed a couple of industry people who really, really enjoyed it, and then things moved very quickly for me. But I felt like I felt very vulnerable. I felt like people would think I was crazy because of the inner dialogue in Tilda. It turns out that it's really common.
Ye I would say so, which I mean, that kinda it's kinda making me thinking, like, I'm not Tilda's age, and yet her inner dialogue, there are certainly and I haven't had the same life experiences as her, and
Mm,
yet there are definitely moments that I felt like I could relate to.
mm,
So, would you say, though, that this is a book for I mean, I think a lot of people, but women in particular of maybe a variety of ages as well?
I've I I would say that I probably wrote it for the over 40 set, and yet I have had so many different people coming up to me and embracing Tilda and the message of Tilda and also sharing with me their own stories of invisibility. And yeah, I mean, there are so many different versions of invisibility in the world today, and I can only speak of my own, but acknowledge that there are so many others. I was at an event in Sydney uh, when it first came out, and both the bookseller and myself were shocked. And we spoke about this recently. There were a lot of young women in the audience, and I had one particular group come up for a signing afterwards. And these are, my interpretation, beautiful young women who were crying and telling me how invisible they felt. A couple of them were young single mums, and I'm looking at them thinking, this really is about perception. My perception of you is so different from the perception of yourself, and this is what Tilda is about. But it made me realize that there is a message there for whatever your age, whatever your gender.
Absolutely. It definitely is. I mean, there's so much about identity and self-perception, like you said,
Mm,
and Tilda is one experience or a variety of experiences in one person, but I feel like it extends so far beyond. So that's amazing to hear. Because yeah, as I was reading it too, I definitely found moments where I related to her and
mm.
I appreciated her inner dialogue and the humor in what is a very challenging situation that she's going through. What would you say was your, on the flip side of my earlier question, your favorite scene to write or the one that you're like most excited about for readers?
I really enjoyed the writing the support group scenes. Uh, and I liked that because I'm highly visual. So to have Tilda walk into a community hall where there's a support group of women who have varying degrees of invisibility and their struggles around that, and it's ridiculous and funny and tragic and
Yep,
yeah,
all in
and
one.
everyone's story. Yeah, so I enjoyed those chapters. I call them scenes, but chapters. And also, I sometimes characters surprise you. And so there were a couple of characters from that part of Tilda's life who I really only thought they were going to be quite small roles, but they ended up being quite pivotal in the book. And one of them is Carol, who she becomes friends with, who is completely invisible, and she became a favorite character of so many people because she's funny. But also the woman who runs the support group. I thought she was just going to be a really like a passing character. I didn't like her when I started writing her, and by the end of it, she was one of my favorite characters. So that it's sort of interesting how a character will have his or her own agenda. You know.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that was I wanted to talk to you like about the secondary characters because they're so influential on like Tilda's journey. So it's really interesting to hear like how they evolved even as you were writing. That's so I love that. Um, I don't want to I know it's already vulnerable, but like is there one moment in particular that really sticks out that you felt so connected to Tilda, if you feel like sharing?
Um, a lot.
Yeah,
And actually,
obviously.
reading it again and reading some of the, chapters in particular with her ex-husband, it was really triggering for me. Because, I'd really put some of my own stuff into that, but at the same time, I feel like that set me free. In terms of the childhood stuff, I had a very similar childhood to Tilda, but I've dealt with it, which is why I'm able to write about it, which is why I'm able to talk about it, and which is why I'm able to say the journey that Tilda goes through actually works and it can set you free from your childhood trauma. But I did find some of the ex-husband stuff quite difficult. But there's one scene, a flashback where Tilda is sitting in a car as a child outside a pub waiting for her father to come out. And she's got the windows rolled up because she's nervous and it's a hot summer summer day. And he comes out and he raps on the window and and she thinks, great, we're going to go. And she winds down the window and he passes her a lemonade and a packet of crisps, and says, "Oh, I'm doing business. I've met some business people in the pub. I'll be late." And so she ends up sitting there for hours more, and it's really frightening and awful thing for her. Very common for me when I was a child. I sort of was outside a pub a lot in a hot car waiting for my dad to come out. But I cannot tell you the amount of women who have come up to me and said, "You just described my childhood." Like, life, I guess, growing up in the 70s or 80s. In those days, a lot of women ended up sitting in cars waiting for their dads to come out of pubs.
Yeah, very different from the children today. I
Right?
would
You'd be arrested now.
yeah.
But he was father of the year because he brought me a lemonade.
Oh my goodness. No, but, I mean, that just goes to show, like, how we're really not alone in a lot of our
Yes.
experiences, even when it always feels like we are.
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
you're not, and I mean, I think that that's, like, just, like, one of the powerful things about reading is that you find out you're not alone, or
Yes.
you gain new perspective, you gain empathy for people in going through different experiences too, so that's as hard as it is, and, it's amazing that those women have connected to that specific experience too, to say, like,
Yes. Yeah,
they
and I
weren't
think
alone in that.
this is one of the things that I've discovered since Tilda was published is that my story or Tilda's story, it's actually not that unusual. It's a really common story, and I think that's why it's resonating with women.
Would you say that that's, if there was like one thing that you wanted readers to sort of be able to take away, would you say that that is the message, or is there something else that you would add to that?
I think ultimately the message of Tilda is to take the time to learn to be kind to yourself. I
Mm.
think it really, for me, I wanted to show people that you can become the observer of your inner dialogue. That inner dialogue actually shapes your view of the world. And if you become the observer and you start to realize how you speak to yourself, it can be quite shocking, actually. It certainly was for me. We wouldn't speak to our best friends the way we speak to ourselves.
No, you sounds like you were at my therapy session this morning.
Oh, well, Tilda was my therapy, yeah.
Oh my gosh, I'm like, "Oh, yep, okay, sounds like you were a fly on the wall in today's therapy
Yeah.
session."
But how great that you know how you speak to yourself. Because I was in my 40s when I realized I had an inner dialogue. I was so shocked to discover that my perception of myself was completely wrong and incorrect, and I was wondering why my life was a mess still and always was. And then I was introduced to this inner dialogue, and I was like, oh my God, I speak to myself like that all the time. Once that genie is out of the bottle, there's no shoving it back in. You've got to ask yourself, okay, do I want to live like this? Or do I want to change the way I speak to myself? And you
Exactly.
can do that. And you can
You
learn to be kind.
you can, and you can learn to question it too,
Yeah.
rather
So
than just
is it right? Is it correct? Yeah.
exactly. Yeah.
Mm.
So, that was one thing that we worked on today.
Well, it sounds like you're with the right therapist.
Oh, she's fantastic, but no, I just that's so funny, and I mean, I think maybe that's why I felt connected to Tilda too, is because I definitely had that. And yeah, there's so many people have an inner dialogue and don't
Yes.
actually know. And it truly, I mean, it can be like absolutely detrimental to your mental health, and then
Yes.
how you respond to the world, and your inner dialogue is not always right. And in my case, or in many cases, is often not right.
That's right. And you can change it. That's neuroplasticity. You can actually change the neural pathways of the way that you respond to things. And that's why meditation is actually really great. It gives you the space to start to sort of change the neural pathways.
It is. So when did you actually, I know you even have like at the end of the book you talk a little bit about the meditation that you do.
Mm.
When did you start that journey for yourself?
I can remember I lived in Japan for 5 years in my 20s, and I can remember I was early 20s. I had went to some meditation course and sat down and tried to meditate, staring at a candle for 7 minutes. Like it was really, and I didn't have a mystical experience. And I just thought, well, that was a waste of time. But I kept coming back to it over the years, and I studied a range of different sort of styles of meditation, including I went to the Vipassana course that Tilda does. That's the 10-day silent retreat, which was like hell. It was so tough. Very beneficial, but very difficult. I have friends who do it. I have one friend who does that annually. I prefer to go to Bali, but she goes to
Each
Vipassana,
their own.
you know.
Oh, those scenes, I was so blown away because I'm thinking that I'm like, I would never be able to do
No,
this.
it's tough going, but it is a crash course in meditation. But there are other ways to do it. I guess I continued doing Vipassana meditation for a few years because I understood the benefits. There were benefits, but it was a drag. Like I didn't want to be sitting down and meditating like that, same style over and over again. It was only a few years later I discovered the style that I currently use. I mix things up a bit. And the benefits now are so incredible, and I enjoy it. I enjoy both. Like I look forward to sitting down and meditating. I enjoy the process, and I enjoy the benefits in my life.
Very cool, very cool. I feel like it is a practice I could definitely use a little bit more, but maybe we'll get there in my therapy sessions. Um, you mentioned earlier, and I'm sorry to like ask this, but that you've been wanting to spend some time this week writing, because
Mm,
you've been super busy. Is
mm.
there anything in particular that you can share that you're working on?
Yes, I'm about 15,000 words off the first draft of my next novel. So, and it, like with Tilda, it's a little bit of a merging of women's fiction and self-help fiction, but without the magical realism in it. It's a family saga about four women and in the same family, and it's about the stories we tell ourselves because we're so attached to our stories.
Oh, I'm so fascinated. I cannot wait to hear more about that. That's awesome. Um, how has your experience we've talked a little bit about it, but just in the several days now that Tilda has been out in the world, has it been a whirlwind? What has the overall experience been like now that so many readers are getting to experience Tilda?
Mm. Well, Tilda has been out for a year in Australia, and it
That's so
hasn't
right. I'm
yeah,
only
and
thinking
it
I'm
actually hasn't stopped. I've had, it's been a big experience with Tilda. I'm still doing events, and so for 12 months, it's been crazy, but now it's out in the US, so that's
yeah.
like on steroids. And what a gift. I mean, to have a book published in America, like that is it's huge. And I've had a few really big, like scream out loud, jump up and down moments. It was in People magazine. That was incredible. Yesterday I was tagged by Oprah Daily because it's on their spring read list. I mean, I just I was jumping up and down and screaming, and my son thought that I'd seen a huntsman spider or something and came running into the
Oh,
room.
no.
I'm like, no, no, no.
Oh my goodness, congratulations. That's amazing. So yeah, and you'll have to forgive me for being like so US book focused and the timetables for all of them I know are always so different, but that is incredible. I've been seeing all your posts like when you posted about it being in People, so and even though I mean Tilda is like great for any time of the year, there is something about like the about spring feeling, like, really renewing, and
I
so it would be a
agree.
really good time to read it right now.
Yes, I agree. I think that, winter, going into like from fall into winter, it's more of a time of hibernating and sort of really starting to kind of work on yourself. But then spring, it's really putting all of that into practice and getting back out there in the world. And I hope that readers see that Tilda has this message of renewal and how you can actually change your life.
Absolutely, I would definitely agree. Well, in addition to us liking to talk to authors on this podcast, we also love to share other books. Are there any books that you have read that were particularly inspiring to you or that you just love to recommend to anybody?
Yes, one of my favourites recently was "Pictures of You" by Emma Gray, and she wrote The Last Love Note, which was a bestseller over there, and I think that "Pictures of You" also was on the Today best-selling list. It's a great read. She's an amazing writer. A great read, sort of about relationships, coercive control. So there are some pretty big themes in there. Um, and I just read a book called The Last Illusion of Paige White by Vanessa McCausland. It's not out in the US yet, but it is out in June. And I think everyone's going to really love that. It's got a fascinating premise. I won't go into it, but you keep an eye out for it.
Okay, I'll go to my Goodreads after this and add that to my TBR. My co-host and I, we always joke that like anytime we have an episode, our TBR or TB read list just gets like longer and longer and longer and longer and longer. And because of this podcast, we're never gonna finish our TBR, but we love adding to it and love getting new recommendations and hopefully sharing those with other people. So I will definitely add those. That sounds really good, and I will keep an eye out for June.
Yes, definitely do.
Wonderful. Well, across the globe, what is the best way for anyone to connect with you, to learn more about Tilda, and then of course any future works?
So Instagram, probably. I am on Facebook. I'm on Instagram, and I'm on Substack, and I'm just starting to really build that. And on Substack, I'm actually doing. I've already held a 10-day meditation challenge. where it was 10 days, 10 minutes a day, and there was a chat as well, and people came on and we could talk to each other and anyone could ask questions. So I'm going to continue doing that because it only takes 10 minutes a day to start to really change your life if you want to sit and meditate. But yeah, so Substack.
Now, well, this has been so wonderful. Is there anything else you would want listeners and readers to know about you or about Tilda?
Well, not really. I think this has been such a great conversation, and definitely, if you read Tilda and you enjoy it, get in touch. Don't be shy. Reach out. Tell me, that you liked it or that it changed something for you. I love hearing from readers.
That's fantastic. Well, I will definitely link to your website as well as your social media, specifically your Instagram, so that people can get in touch and reach out as soon as they read Tilda is Visible, which is available in the US as of February 25th. And as we mentioned, has been available elsewhere already. So I will link to all of that so everyone can find you and also connect with Tilda as well. Jane, thank you so much for this conversation, for the opportunity to meet you and to get to meet Tilda as well. I'm so excited to hear more from you in the future. Cheers.